You are now listening to the Going Deep podcast with your hosts, Kevin Massari and Mike Bunt, live from the Cover One Sports Network. Here we go.
Josh Allen, looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw. And it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action.
Allen, deep downfield, wide open. Welcome into a new edition of the Going Deep podcast. I'm your host today, Kevin Massari, here with Mike Bunt to talk about where the Bills go next. We'll have some options and some ideas on what this means. AFC Championship weekend, NFC Championship weekend, just a few days ago. Great games there, setting up for a pretty interesting Super Bowl here in 2 weeks. But Mike, first and foremost, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I'm doing a lot better ever since Cincinnati lost to Kansas City in the conference championship game. I know that's a weird statement to say after all these years of rooting against the Chiefs, but it really felt nice having someone really put Cincy back down to earth following all the crap that's come out of their mouths in recent weeks. And they were getting a little bit too cocky for a team that hasn't won a Super Bowl. And I'm glad that someone grounded them, and excited for this upcoming Super Bowl matchup, even though it doesn't have the Bills. I think Eagles-Chiefs is going to be a good one.
Yeah, it was cathartic of sorts to see Cincinnati go down. It was interesting because I think that game and that environment could have benefited the Bills. Unfortunately, they didn't get to that game, to that stage, but I think you saw a more grounded Cincinnati Bengals team they struggled at times throughout that game. Defense played pretty well for them for the most part, with a team with no receivers. Chiefs had no receivers. Kelsey hurt, Mahomes on one leg. But Mahomes is still able to get it done. Offensively, they didn't look the same at all that they did coming off of the Buffalo victory. But, Eli Apple is going home to his rightful spot in Cancun. So that's great to see. And they just talked so much the entire week, the entire playoffs, from Zach Taylor even running his mouth about, sending people home and making problems and not going by the script or whatever garbage he was saying, and calling himself the top dogs, and Eli Apple's shenanigans. So it's good to see them put them away. Now you can go ahead and root for the Eagles, root for the Chiefs, do whatever your heart desires as the NFL comes to the Super Bowl with a Super Bowl halftime show from Rihanna. In just a few weeks. But Mike, where do the Bills go from here? That's the question of the day. There is a lot of different ways you can go with this, but we're going to start in the top at the coaching staff. Sean McDermott, number 2 in in-game adjustments per a lot of advanced analytics. He makes the right calls on 4th down, on 2-point conversions, timeouts, delay of games. So he takes a lot of heat. One of the things that still sticks to me to this day is Pat Freiermuth, the Steelers tight end. We talk about it sometimes, saying that if he picked one player to play for or coach to play for, it would be Sean McDermott. Just totally unbiased, unprovoked. So that does mean something to me. So from there, Mike, what do you think about the perceived version that all they did was fire their safeties coach? Now, a lot of people are calling that a cop-out. Maybe he just is the one who had below average scores on the exit interviews. What is your opinion on the only move being the safeties, which, they obviously had Poyer and Hyde, had nothing to do with Salgado, but the rest of the unit was pretty underwhelming?
I have no issue with it at all. Zero issue. And I know I'm in the minority. A lot of Bills Mafia, most fans wanted change, and I get it. The Bills' best in the playoffs hasn't been good enough to win it all. But one error that a lot of fans and people in any situation in life have a lot of times, is just because it hasn't been good enough yet doesn't mean that it won't be good enough in the future. And I'm the type of person where I look at it as you want to give yourself as many possible opportunities during a window of time to win a Super Bowl. So this year, obviously disappointing, falling short, but why sacrifice future windows for a move that may or may not work? So with the guys in place, we know that they're good enough to win the division. They're good enough to win games in the playoffs. Where have they fallen short? Against Cincinnati in this year, and then Kansas City the 2 prior years. I could make an argument that any other team in football would have fallen short against Cincinnati or Kansas City in those opportunities. So it isn't necessarily a lot of people are going to look at it as, well, the Bills' best isn't good enough to beat them. Well, we don't know if that's going to be the case in the future. And the issue with that mindset is everybody's looking at it as Leslie Frazier screwed us over in the playoffs the last 3 years, and people are going to say Ken Dorsey's offense limited us in the playoffs against Cincinnati. And while those are true, you can't just make blatant statements, fire them, without offering how are you going to replace them? How are you going to get better? And the reason why I have a problem with people just saying fire Leslie Frazier, fire Ken Dorsey is people would say, well, hire Vic Fangio. First of all, you don't know if Vic Fangio would even want to come to Buffalo. Number two, people that are saying Vic Fangio, how many of them actually know the scheme that he runs? Or are they just saying blanket names that they've heard expressed on television? Thirdly, the Bills have been drafting and developing players for the last 6 years to fit the scheme that McDermott and Leslie Frazier run. So if you fire Frazier and you bring in someone that's going to run a different scheme, you're going to also have to make a bunch of roster moves to fit whatever that new scheme is. Also, do we think that just because they would get rid of Frazier, that McDermott would bring in a coach with a different philosophy than his defensively? Probably not, considering McDermott has been a defensive coach his entire career. He's not going to just hire someone that thinks differently than what he does. So a lot of this talk about do this, do that, do this to the defense, not going to happen. I said it wasn't going to happen, and it's apparent 9 days after the Bills season ended, it isn't going to happen. Secondly, if you were going to change this scheme, if you were going to do stuff, you would need the salary cap space or the draft capital to bring in those guys to jumpstart that. So this wasn't the offseason to do it regardless. You look on the offensive side of the ball. What do they always say about offensive coordinators? They struggle in their year one. They do. Ken Dorsey, there's a room for a lot of improvement. He definitely did not have the best year one. But if the Bills offense struggling under Ken Dorsey is still a top 2 metric unit in the NFL, that shows they still have a super high ceiling and that there is room for tweaks and improvement and to get this team better. So where do they go with the coaching staff? I don't think they go anywhere for the most part. I think they enter this offseason looking at themselves with a self-evaluation of saying, you know what? We have been doing things on defense the same way for 6 years, and we have gotten a ton of regular season success. We have been a top 5, 6 defense 5 out of the 6 years. We were the number 1 defense in 2021. We were a top 5 metric defense this year. But every time we play an elite quarterback, we get exposed. What their job this offseason, and you can do this without replacing coaches, is why are we getting exposed by Patrick Mahomes? Why are we getting exposed by Joe Burrow and all these other elite quarterbacks? Their job this offseason is to come up with that answer. And it doesn't matter if that answer is shown during week 7 of the regular season or week 14. They just need to know that they have that answer. So come playoff time, they can use it. And I'm sorry for the long-winded response, but a lot of people are conveniently forgetting that the Bills' answer this past offseason wasn't even on display during the playoffs. The way you stop Joe Burrow, the way you stop Patrick Mahomes is getting pressure with your front 4 defensively without having to blitz, without having to send guys and make your secondary vulnerable. The Bills didn't have Von Miller. The Bills didn't have Daquan Jones. Ed Oliver has not developed into the player that fans were hoping he would be, all while playing without Micah Hyde for the entire season, which hurt the secondary. A banged-up Jordan Poyer, who was not himself the second half of the year. A banged-up Matt Milano, who is still playing great despite an injury that should severely limit you. And then a Jordan Phillips, who had a torn labrum, who definitely was nowhere close to 100% on Sunday when they lost to the Bengals. So I bring that all up because the Bills' answer this offseason was, we are going to get pressure with our front four, and they're going to take care of stuff because we got Von Miller, Jones, and Rousseau and Oliver. When some of those guys went down, that ruined their entire plan, and they didn't have an answer after that happened. So if you want to hold the Bills coaching staff accountable, ask them, why were you not coming up with other solutions once you knew the main emphasis of your defense was taken away? But Bills fans shouldn't be like, oh, we have no answers. They did have a good plan going into the season. It just got wrecked when certain players went down.
It's fair enough. Let's go through the stats now just to kind of bring it all, kind of bring it all home. Opposing quarterbacks against the Bills of the last 3 playoff losses, 72% completion percentage, 315 passing yards, 9 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 35.7 points per game, 89 first downs they've allowed, an average. That's 5 total punts from those 3 games. It's quite frankly just not been good enough. 36.6 points, 1,403 yards total, 467 yards per game. The defense has allowed in those 3 playoff losses, 2020, 2021, 2022. It's just not good enough. There's no other way to put it. Now, to your point, Mike, if you let Leslie Frazier go, the most likely replacement could be someone like John Butler, your defensive backs coach, who has had some good success developing players, pass game coordinator. Does anything change? Is it a little bit more aggressive? Possibly, but I wouldn't anticipate any big changes. Would a defensive coach then bring in Vic Fangio? I just didn't see it. Is there really a big upgrade with Steve Wilkes? I don't know. So I think that, you could be requesting for the coaching staff to be fired, but ultimately the defensive coordinator, I don't know what could have changed in those 3 playoff games with a different defensive coordinator in terms of underneath Sean McDermott, that is. So I think they'll make some corrections, some changes. They clearly designated there was an issue with the safety communication, the safety development, something within the safety room that needed to be corrected. And then offensively, I mean, Josh Allen basically pulled the ultimate trump card, Mike, and basically just said, I need to be better for my offensive coordinator. There needs to be an execution piece. Daquan Jones doubled down on that this week as well, basically saying there's still a piece to the execution puzzle on our end as well. It wasn't just the bad calls all the entire game, where the safety's in the right position on that Jamar Chase touchdown. Maybe not.
You can't tell me that's on coaching. Poyer snuck up on the wide receiver screen and let his guy get past him. And the players hold some responsibility in this. And Bills fans have been using coaching as a scapegoat, but why not blame players for not stepping up? The players had a horrendous showing. And you can blame the coaches for not having them prepared properly, but I think you can blame almost everyone that played in that game for the failure that ensued.
Yeah.
We act like the Bills' best players are incapable of failure. They were pretty horrendous all around. And I think they would admit it to you. And that's what Daquan Jones basically said in this tweet. He said, somebody called him out and said, fire the coaches. And Daquan Jones said, what are you talking about? I'm paraphrasing. We got to do our jobs. And this is where I have a real problem, Kev. If people want Leslie Frazier fired because they just want a different scheme, different way of attacking things, that's fine. But don't say he sucks when the Bills' metrics defensively show that they don't. That's ignorant. And I get it. They've failed in the playoffs, and we've gotten to the Super Bowl or bust, period. But we keep saying one thing, and then we contradict ourselves the next statement that we make. Everyone wants to talk about how Sean Payton is such a great coach right now. Well, you want to know something? Him and McDermott, the last 6 years that they've coached, their win-loss record is within 3 games. They both won. Peyton, I believe, has 4 division titles. Sean McDermott has 3. Their win-loss record in the playoffs is similar too. Peyton had a period with Drew Brees in his prime where he went 7-9 3 consecutive years and missed the playoffs. Brian Daboll was an offensive coordinator that couldn't keep a job at his first 3 places because people thought he sucked. Did he suck, or did his situations suck? Too often, we look at failure and we say, this guy blew it, that guy blew it. We don't look deep enough into where the failure actually comes from and know what to attribute it to. Like, everyone wants to say that it's the Bills should be like Kansas City. Well, the truth is Kansas City is an anomaly. What New England did is an outlier during all those years. Most great teams do not make it to the Super Bowl consistently. The best of the best do. But Kansas City has simply been a tier above the Bills and Cincinnati. And eventually you hope that the Bills can break through, but a lot of people just consistently think the Bills are just going to change what they're doing on defense. I don't see that happening, Kev. It's not going to happen regardless of who the defensive coordinator is. And when we start bringing up names like Vic Fangio, when we start saying Steve Wilkes, are we going to look at any of the issues that they've ever had? Steve Wilkes was a head coach that got fired after 1 year because he was considered a failure that season. Vic Fangio was a head coach in Denver that couldn't guide one of the best defenses to the playoffs. Leslie Frazier actually took the Minnesota Vikings to the playoffs 1 year and might have gotten fired a little bit prematurely. We've been talking about Leslie Frazier for the last 2 years, deserving head coaching opportunities throughout the NFL. And then because of a bad game in the playoffs, we're suddenly on fire Leslie Frazier. You want to know what? The Bills allowed 17 points per game in 2021, and they were the number 1 defensive unit in the NFL. This year, they allowed 17.9 points per game. And we're suddenly going to say that's deserving of getting fired? I get it. The playoffs are where you get judged now. But that was one horrible performance all around. And if everybody is just going to criticize Leslie Frazier and Ken Dorsey, well, then I reserve the right to also criticize Josh Allen. Because no one wants to ever give him any crap. And they'll know it. That kind of drives me nuts. Because we are a fan base that will give excuse after excuse after excuse to our star quarterback when he doesn't get it done. Did he get it done in the AFC Championship against Kansas City? No. The offense failed us in that game until they scored garbage time touchdowns. Did he get it done on Sunday against Cincinnati? No. Was the offensive line horrible? Yes. But Joe Burrow was sacked 9 times in the game against the Tennessee Titans in the divisional round last year. And Cincinnati still found a way to win that game and get to Kansas City and then win the AFC Championship. Patrick Mahomes had to deal with one of the worst defenses in the NFL throughout the early part of his career. NP86, I'm sorry about the self-righteousness, but I'm tired of everyone in the fan base making excuses for our golden boy and just blaming all of it on the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator when the offensive line was putrid. We've had no good running game. We have only one wide receiver that's performing. We were missing most of our defensive line. That was the key players. Our coverage has been horrendous for a while. And we're just acting like because the coaches had no answers that they deserve to be fired, even though their long-term success over the last 5 years has been incredible. Sean McDermott is 62-35 in 6 years as a head coach. 10-6, 13-3, 11-6, 13-3. You know what I recommend anybody who wants Sean McDermott fired? Look at the history of the Buffalo Bills. Look at the history. Because outside of a short run in the 1960s and the Bills Super Bowl years, this is easily the greatest run of Bills football in their history. Look at Tony Dungy's record in the playoffs. Look at Sean Payton's record in the playoffs. Look at all of the all-time great coaches in the playoffs. Many of them don't have the win-loss records that people think. One Super Bowl is the difference between being an all-time great and being a nobody. I know I'm coming across as condescending. I apologize, but the last 2 weeks have shown the elitist approach that Bills fans have gotten to where now they cannot accept anything short of a Super Bowl. We have said over and over again, Kev, all season, the best team in the NFL has a 20% chance of winning the Super Bowl before the year. The best team entering the playoffs has a 25% chance of winning the Super Bowl. This is basic math. If you have a 25% chance of winning the Super Bowl entering the playoffs, you have a 75% chance of not winning the Super Bowl. Instead of getting all flamed up because of one disappointing performance, let's realize the odds are not in your favor. They have to make adjustments. They have to make changes. And I was extremely disappointed with how everything played out against Cincinnati. But tearing things up, firing people, all that does is make you feel better about somebody else feeling pain for the result.
Yeah, you got to place blame somewhere.
Make the team better unless you have an answer. None of us are throwing out answers. We just want people fired to see people fired. If we ran companies like that, if we ran businesses like that, we would have no society. I'm sorry, Kev. I'm just tired of it. I've been dealing with this for the last 9 days.
Yeah. Well, as you look at it a little bit deeper, as you dive into some of the statistics, Andy Reid till 2019 went 12-14 in the playoffs. That's with Kansas City. That's before Mahomes. Since getting Mahomes, obviously they've only lost twice, to Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl and to Cincinnati last year, and went 9-2 since starting in the year of 2019-2020 when they won the Super Bowl. So with all that being said, prior to that, he was considered one of the biggest busts and flops ever. Now he's considered one of the best coaches ever. After coaching, I guess, 40 years, he finally got that label. He lost to the Giants in the division round, the championship round 3 times in a row, then lost to in the Super Bowl, lost in a division round again, another championship, another 2 back-to-back wild card. Here's how he finally got fired in Philly, Mike. You ready? 07, he went 8-8. In 08, 09, 08, he lost in the championship round. 09, and in 2010, he lost back-to-back and one and dones in the wild card round. Goes 8-8 in 2011, still employed. Then finally goes 4-12, and 2 back-to-back years missing the playoffs in 2012 and got let go. So that's finally like the Andy Reid, and went 583, which is worse than Sean McDermott's record at this point. So anyways, as we kind of take a look at what the Bills can do specifically in this situation, I had a thought. The Bills need to free up cap space, and our Greg Thompson has a solution. I come up with solutions all the time. Lots of restructures that can be done. Josh Allen, there's a couple right off the bat to get you some premier money. One more thing that they can work on doing, Mike, and I brought this up in tweet, and I'm still getting mentions on it days and days and days later, and realized it wasn't a talking point yet, was Ed Oliver and his $10.5 million guaranteed contract with 0 cap hit. You may need to move that money some way or another. Either extend him and keep him long-term, reduce that cap this year, or trade him, whether it's for an asset, player for player, 1-for-1, or him for a certain draft choice. Mike, do you like that idea, trading Ed Oliver right now to help continue to build your team? And if so, what would he fetch?
I'm definitely more open to it than I was a week ago when you brought it up. I think that could be a potential solution to some roster movement that's needed. I don't know if it's realistic at this time, but I definitely think all things are on the table for the Bills going forward. I don't know what it could fetch. I know there's been some Hunter Renfrow talk recently. Is he good enough to be a swap in that situation? I'm not sure, but I definitely think the Bills should explore all possibilities. We've talked a little bit about what we think the Bills should do this offseason. And my number one thing is attack offense. when you look at defense in the NFL, it is very difficult to be consistently good on a year-to-year basis. You'll see more variance when you're looking at defensive rankings and stats. When you look at historical trends and stuff like that, offense is a lot more predictable and a lot easier to stay consistently at the top. I think what the Bills need is to basically look at it as we have some of our core defensive guys, and we're going to just have to just slot other people around them. We're not going to be able to spend big money throughout our defense. We've tried that. We've invested draft capital. It hasn't worked out. I would accept a lesser defense if I knew that the Bills offense come playoff time, we're going to score 30 points or 25 points every game. And what I think the outside of Tremaine, because I think Tremaine will get his money from the Bills, I would say the draft is all about offense. First round, you need an offensive guard or you need a wide receiver. Whoever you don't draft in the first round, take that position in the second round and just find a way to get Josh as many weapons as possible. I think Singletary is going to be gone. The Bills will most likely bring in another running back to complement James Cook. And really, it's just find a way to keep filling those needs on the offensive side of the ball. I think, like you said, Poyer is going to be gone. Oliver is something to look into to see what you could fetch for him. Tremaine will probably, I think, come back, but who knows 100%. And then Daquan Jones, you can do some things with his contract, see what you can do to help out the Bills salary cap situation. But this whole offseason with our limited ability to make changes needs to be geared on giving Josh Allen every possible weapon that he needs. We talked about it last offseason, Kevin. You and I both wanted them to address wide receiver early in the draft. We had our reasons. People laughed at us, Kev. People laughed at us. And we talked about Odell Beckham. Obviously, his health wasn't there, but we both were in favor of bringing him on board. And people still laughed at us at that point. The Bills can't execute at the highest level consistently unless they have three prominent weapons for Josh to go to. And so adding another person is pivotal. Having Khalil Shakir step up this offseason to be a prominent slot person, critical. Ken Dorsey finding a way to adjust his scheme and give Josh easier options is a must. Brian Dable, that was the best thing he did. He found a way to scheme up easy plays for Josh. They might not have been as high in the metrics some of the years, but they made big plays in big moments. It was not this offense this year was difficult. It was a struggle for them. They put up good numbers. They scored a good amount of points per game. Allen ended up getting the stats he normally gets, but everything was a struggle. And next year, I would like them to make the adjustments to where they could be flowing at a better rate. I think they need to incorporate more of a short passing attack where they give Josh more slants and other easier options. We saw it a little bit earlier in the season, and then they went away from it. It can't just be down the field, mid-range deep balls in short runs every time. We need to find a way to make adjustments. So while some people would say bring in a different offensive coordinator, I'm going to trust that a guy like Ken Dorsey that's been around the NFL for a good amount of time, that was a quarterback at one of the best college programs in the history of college football at the U, has some things up his sleeve this offseason, watching tape, watching some of the other better offenses in the league, and can figure things out. Because I truly do believe Dorsey has a big enough knowledge of the game to where he can make adjustments and fix things, but definitely not the best year one for him overall.
Yeah, some good points, some good conversation going on. Bijan Robinson could be a generational running back. We know how split the community is on running back in the first round. Yeah, another premier running back, probably better than Kenneth Walker, than Breece Hall, than Travis Etienne. Bijan is definitely somebody that we all talk about taking pressure off of Josh, making him not Superman. Bijan Robinson's ridiculous. That's just something to consider. The Bills will generally err vet on the vet side of the free agent offensive line market. I think they still play in that. I still think that they do something like, they have Tommy Doyle coming back. They re-sign Saffold on the bench. They plug in a starting left guard on the market into the roster. They continue to develop Spencer Brown at $1.1 million. It's just too valuable to continue to develop him. Maybe draft a tackle late in the draft as well. But sitting at 27, you might not have the option for a plug-and-play mauler. But what might you have the option at? A starting receiver like Jordan Addison, a Josh Downs,
and Jigba from Ohio State.
Jackson Smith and Jigba is definitely another name that could be up there as well. Could you make a trade Mike Evans, Jerry Jeudy, like you've already mentioned, maybe an Oliver swap for call up Las Vegas and see what's going on there, to see if they're interested in dealing with you for a slot receiver. So there's different ways that you can go. Would you trade for a slot in Hunter Renfrow? Would you go for a premier boundary to
if you had the option, trade Ed Oliver for Hunter Renfrow in this hypothetical crazy world, straight up, would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, you increase slot right then and there. You check it off, and I still think you go offense. You still continue to pound the pavement for offensive players. So I just think that they've been looking for running back. I don't think Nyheim Hines is a guarantee on the roster. He's not guaranteed to be on the roster. He's making $5 million, the 12th highest paid running back in the league. It doesn't work right now. So he needs to take $2 to $3+ million off of his contract to stay a Bill. If he doesn't, more power to him. I don't blame him, I guess. The Bills then are just sitting with Cook. And people are just like, get UDFAs. I guess so. Like, yes, Brian Robinsons do exist, later round draft choices. But someone like Bijan Robinson is such a premier talent. This isn't just Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Sorry, Chiefs fans. It's not. It's a premier running back in the generational form. So that could help.
We saw what Brees was doing to the Jets last year before he you and I were big proponents of Brees. We talked him up. A lot of people didn't even think he was worth a first, second round pick. And we were discussing how when running backs were more valuable, that a guy like Brees Hall would have been a top 10 pick. And I think we saw what a great running back can do for an offense.
Yep.
When in the right situation. I'm not a running back in the first round guy unless it is the right player in the right fit. But Brees Hall, when he was playing, that Jets offense was capable of moving the ball, and they had some success. The moment Brees Hall went out, the Jets were not the same the rest of the year. So if you have a situation, like you said, where the wideouts that you would consider in the first round are taken, and you don't have that guy that would slot into a starting O guard or starting right tackle, then you would have to consider a guy like Bijan Robinson, because you're getting that impact player right away. If it's a situation, though, where you do have a stud wideout or a stud offensive line, I think you take those over the running back in that scenario. But right now, like we said, Kev, I don't care what the weapon is. When I'm talking about offensive weapon, it could be the best guard, it could be the best wide receiver, the best running back. Just surround Josh Allen with playmakers that will make his life easier. And a playmaker can be a guy that gets yards after the catch or makes the jump ball touchdown, or it can be the guy that just prevents the defensive tackle from getting to you and getting in your face.
Yeah. I'm going to be so pro Bijan Robinson that it's not even funny. That same offensive line, that the patchwork, Joe Mixon offensive line last week ran for a bunch of yards. Like, I think you can make your offensive line better with a good running back. You can make your quarterback better. You can't key in on him as much. You can still do those things with a good offensive line. You can still play him a certain way. You still don't have to respect the run. I do believe that the Bills will upgrade this offensive line. There's some great offensive linemen I like in this draft. I don't think it needs to come at the expense of 27 overall. I think you're looking at, Andrew Voorhees. He's a guy that, I've had my eyes on a little bit. Osiris Torrance, will he be there, or will he go earlier? Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame, Ricky Stromwell from Arkansas. So there's Stromberg, So there's definitely some name, Luke Haggard from Indiana. So there's definitely some names there of players that, down that we could be watching in the Senior Bowl region. So I do want to plug, we have a live video going at 9 p.m. here tonight. Greg and the crew will be there giving you update from day one from the Senior Bowl down in Alabama. So make sure you check that out here, going live in just under 90 minutes. It's going to be a good one. So it'll be a Senior Bowl recap of everything going on down there in Mobile, Alabama. So definitely look out for that. We'll definitely continue this chat a little bit more based on what the guys are seeing on foot. Eric, Greg, and others are down there live from Alabama. So make sure you tune into that here shortly. But I just believe there's so much to be done on the offensive side of the ball. And it starts with a slot receiver, a potential wide receiver 2, a few offensive linemen, and a running back, Mike. So
yeah, and I agree. I think those are the positions that they're definitely going to address this offseason. You're going to see the line addressed in some fashion. You're going to see running back addressed, whether that means keeping Singletary or letting him go and replacing him with someone else. Wide receiver is going to be looked at. So that's where they're going to go heavy this offseason. Do they look at a guy like Paris Campbell in free agency? Do they try to add a veteran that can help them out? They are definitely limited with the cap space, but offense. I'd rather lose going down swinging than invest heavily in a defense that, even with those investments, has fallen short in the big moments. I do want to address this question quick from Capico 22. Pre-snap, why were the players 15 yards away from the wide receivers? Why not make Burrow throw it deep over your head in the snow and prove it once for all? I was wondering the same thing during the game, Kev, but one of our buddies at Cover One actually pointed out there is some analytic sense to why you would have off coverage. Traditionally, when you have the off coverage, you force throws that are short of where the line of gain is. And the point is you got to make a tackle. You can still catch up to them. Even though you're not at the line, you can still get to them where they are. Now, situationally, I think you, me, Eric, most of the Cover One guys, we all agree we would have liked to see more press. We would have liked to see them more up on their hands on these Bengals wide receivers. But the way the Bills do things, they are very much by the numbers. There is some analytical sense to what they were doing during the game. I just don't think it was the best strategy when you factor how good the Bengals wide receivers are and how difficult they are to take down after the catch. And that was putting the Bills defenders in some tough situations where they had to make tackles where one-on-one in the snow, slippery conditions, probably not the smartest situation, but it is what it is. And hopefully they live and learn.
Well said. And yeah, but the conditions just made that look a lot worse because you can't break on it. Ideally, you come after him, you make him step up, you make him maybe tip the ball, come up and intercept it. There are different looks there. However, it just looked like a slog. It just looked like they were playing in mud and stuck in mud the entire game.
Yeah.
Offensive line looked poor. The defense just couldn't. It does that conditions, and we could have offensive linemen on this show. It dictates the offensive linemen, all right? That's why their third-string offensive linemen looked so good. Yes, the D-line didn't get there, but a lot of that had to do with the benefit. They got a gift from God to boost their offensive line. The second it started pouring snow, their offensive line got the boost. The Bills' defense didn't play well. They did okay in stretches. They only held their premier 3 receivers to 120 total yards between them. They played okay. Like, sure, you would have liked to not have them to dump 27. Ideally, 20 to 24 was probably more ideal. You weren't going to win that game 16-13. So, like, to me, the defense wasn't great. It was okay, particularly factoring in the injuries and the weather elements. The excuses for me are that the fact that the offense was terrible. Like, they were putting the defense back on the field in these conditions. They punted consistently. They were aggressive at all in terms of going for it. They were going deep the entire game in the snow. Which is funny, Mike, that I wanted to bring up that Cincinnati had an element of Kansas City to go deep a lot. And they get a double coverage throw to Jamar Chase that's completed. And they were, a double cover to T. Higgins jumps over everybody. So, like, sure, those receivers are better than, I guess, than Stephon Diggs. And the Stephon Diggs throw in the end zone that he just missed, just was to the right of him. But ultimately, it wasn't good considering the weather elements. All of it benefited the Bengals. And it just was a weird, wacky day. I do think in a clean environment on a clean day in Atlanta, Georgia, them the Bills and the Chiefs would have played a premier football game with a little bit more offense than we saw this past weekend. So the Bills are going to need to sacrifice defense. So we're sitting here talking about firing Leslie Frazier. We're sitting here talking about what defense are we going to move or make changes on.
The defense is going to get worse.
The defense is going to get worse.
And that's okay. And that's okay. Because what you and I are basically saying is we will accept having a mediocre middle-of-the-line defense if it means that our offense will be unstoppable when it matters. That's why the Chiefs can do what they do. And if we're really looking at why the Chiefs are able to be, because I hear a lot of people say, well, the Bills defense has better players than the Chiefs. The Bills defense is better than the Chiefs. How come they're able to slow down Joe Burrow and the Bills defense is not able to? It comes down to where those key players are. So when the Chiefs have Chris Jones as an D tackle on their team, and he's going up against an offensive line that has only 2 regular starters in the game, he is going to tear them apart. What is the one thing that gets Burrow off his mark? It's when he gets pressured. And a guy like Chris Jones, having Frank Clark, that interior pressure, the constant hands in his face, that's what messes him up. The Bills might have a better overall defense. They might have more big names on their defense.
They do.
But they didn't have the players to attack the Bengals' vulnerabilities. So, yes, the Bills have Trey White. Yes, they have Milano, Edmonds, Poyer. They didn't have the guys in their front four to take advantage of the Bengals' weakness. The Chiefs did. That offensive line was destroyed by the Chiefs, and a lot of it is because they had 2 game wreckers on their defensive line. And we can talk about, well, why didn't the Bills blitz more? A lot of times when the Bills blitz against a quarterback back like Joe Burrow, that's when they get exposed. And because the blitzes weren't even getting to Joe Burrow anyway. So a lot of people will bring up, well, they've invested all these draft picks in the first and second round in D-line. And that is a big point against Brandon Beane in recent years. The one thing I will counter to that, though, in development is definitely important, but the Bills never invested a top 25 pick in those defensive linemen. Greg Rousseau was in the late 20s, and he's had a good career so far. I think he ended up with close to 9 sacks this year. A.J. Epineza was a pick in the 50s. He was a guy that was basically a power edge in college. He used his power. A guy like that is not going to translate to be a sack monster in the NFL. They even said when he was drafted, this is not a guy that you're going to be expecting double-digit sacks from in the NFL. A Boogie Basham was a late second-round pick coming out of Wake Forest, who was basically taken because he was considered the best player available on the board. Boogie Basham wasn't considered one of those double-digit projected NFL sack guys either. You have Shaq Lawson on your playing games because Von Miller is out, and Shaq Lawson is not really much of a pass rusher. He's an edge, contained, stop the run guy. So where the issue is with the Bills' defensive line when Von is out is Rousseau cleans up plays. Von gets the pressure. Someone else gets the pressure. Quarterback steps up in the pocket. Then Rousseau takes him down. Rousseau's not going to get to the quarterback in 2.5 seconds and take him down. He's a cleaner upper. Von was the one guy on the defensive line that had that speed, that burst, that bend to get to the quarterback. The other guys like to collapse the pocket. And when they weren't able to do that, when they were missing their key guys, it just made life difficult for them. And I'm not making excuses, but this is what happens. This is why it's hard to be consistently good in the NFL. Because once you start winning at a high level and you start picking at the bottom of the first round, you're not replacing your holes with A-listers. You're not putting the top of the top in to fill in your holes when you lose a guy. You're putting not projects, but guys that you hope will translate with the skill set. Everybody always talks about when the Bills pass on a player in the draft and the guy 2 plays later becomes a star. Well, they could have had A.J. Brown. They could have had Russell Wilson back in the day. They could have had – when you get past like pick 40, pick 50, you're talking about projections and development. Nothing is a certainty. So
You're talking about Creed Humphrey at center when the Bills had a center.
Like
I don't know what to tell you.
You're hoping these guys turn into something. So it gets a lot more difficult in that stage. And what's happening right now with the Bills is they have a limited cap situation. They don't have good draft picks overall. And essentially what they're going to have to do in the next however many years they have Josh Allen as their quarterback is they're going to have to find a way to develop better and take advantage when they have their opportunities. I remember for a decade plus watching the Indianapolis Colts thinking, God, these guys are great. They're starting every year 8-0, 9-0. Why are they not winning the Super Bowl? Well, they had New England in their way. And if the answer was just fire Tony Dungy or fire their offensive coordinator, or change the quarterback or change this on defense, would have it helped them more? No, like they got rid of Jim Mora once, and obviously Dungy helped them eventually. But sometimes the patient approach of playing the long run will get you more opportunities at actually winning one than trying to go after instant results. We all want instant results in everything in life, Kev. I was a sports anchor for 3 years and a news reporter for a year, and I was moving up job to job to job. I had 3 good jobs in a period of 4 years, and I thought, you know what? I'm getting interviews in top 50 markets, top 60 markets. Why am I going to work in Fort Wayne, Indiana anymore? What do? I leave my job. All those interviews I had, they didn't turn into anything. I ended up taking a news reporter job, and a year and a half later, I quit the job and I started a new life back home in Buffalo. And here I am on a podcast. Why did I end up here? Because I was impatient. I got too high on myself. I thought that I deserved more quicker than what I got. And I ended up sacrificing my entire career because I was not patient enough. We all want the results. Everybody wants the Bills to win a Super Bowl. I just think the patient approach has a better chance of eventually resulting in one than demanding that right away. It sucks. Super Bowl favorites, they didn't do it. But if you look at the history of how many Super Bowl favorites entering a season have actually won a Super Bowl, it's something like 6 to 8 out of like over 50 have actually won. So that puts things in perspective.
Yeah, so the Bills finished, obviously, the year 4th DVOA defense. Kansas City was 17th. The Bills played much better defense the entire season, went 13-3 on multiple game winning streaks multiple times, and just didn't come up in the weather and the snow with Dean Marlowe in the game, your 4th safety, who then goes out, by the way. And now you're playing Jaquan Johnson, Cam Lewis is in the game. I mean, it's just not good. You were missing Daquan Jones in the snow in a game where Joe Mixon finally plays okay because that's all they were doing is running for a majority of it. And you're missing him and Von Miller. You're missing your all-pro. The team plays differently with Poyer and Hyde. You can take more press man risks when you have a premier safety tandem, not a guy that was traded who had already gotten Hail Married earlier this year by PJ Walker. And Cam Lewis, I guess, by a really good play by Justin Jefferson, one of the best ever. But those are the safeties that you have on your roster right now. So the Bills thought of it conservatively against 3 of the best receivers in the league, and it failed. Ultimately, it failed because the offense was bad as well. So let's increase offense and let's do whatever we can to make offense. Is there a development issue? So the one topic I had remaining for today, Mike, is there a development issue? So
that's possible. I think that's possible.
Is it so? I've had people blame Bean and then blame McDermott and his staff. Is it a development issue, or is the team getting, or do we have to talk more about Brandon Bean and his stud drafts now turning average, now turning right around expectation per some statistics saying that he's doing what he's supposed to do with his late picks now?
It's a combo, Kev, as in everything. The performance against Cincy wasn't just the coaching, it was also the players. Now, if you want to go, why aren't there better players? It's a combination of the drafting, it's the combination of free agency, and it's the combination of the coaches not developing or putting the players in the right situation. I do want to address one thing quick. I know some of you guys were commenting, you're tired of being patient. You've been a fan for 50 years. I get it. But it's kind of like the same thing with the Sabres when they did this recent rebuild without Jack Eichel. The drought sucked at 10 years. But keeping Jack Eichel in the picture wasn't going to help the Sabres be any better. So they realized they had to rebuild, even though fans weren't going to be happy about it. And since they made those moves, the Sabres have gotten dramatically better. Sometimes, even though I get it, if you've been a fan for 56 years, it's frustrating to hear that. But sometimes you need that patience. And I know people are going to talk about Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts. Well, you know what the truth about Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts? Joe Burrow was just better quicker than Josh Allen was. Joe Burrow was a stud starting his second year in the league. Josh Allen didn't get to that point until his third year, and the defense wasn't good enough that year to win in the AFC Championship game. And 2 years later, we're out of the rookie contract. Jalen Hurts has all 5 linemen on his team going to the Pro Bowl. He has A.J. Brown. He has Devontae Smith. He has a defense that has 4 players that have double-digit sacks. They have 70 sacks on the regular season.
Sanders and Gainwell.
Yeah. So Jalen Hurts is surrounded by an all-star team. Joe Burrow is playing like Peyton Manning and starting his second, third year in the league. The Bills didn't take advantage of the rookie window. The reason why you need to be patient now is because you don't have the cap and you don't have the draft capital or the ability to attack free agency to where you can get quick answers and go over the top with those moves. Von Miller was the last chance swing to try to make it in this window. Now the Bills win Super Bowls by being smart going forward. I understand that patience isn't what people want to hear, but there's no reason why the Bills can't win a Super Bowl in any of the next 5-10 years. Doesn't mean they will, but all that matters is that you get hot at the right time and you win 3 or 4 games required to win the Super Bowl. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Brady's first year, that team sucked half the regular season, more than half the regular season. They got hot when it mattered. They took it to the Super Bowl. LA Rams won it last year. They were not an amazing team by any stretch of the imagination. The Bills had an 8-game winning streak before the Cincinnati loss. I think that's important to note out, Kev. Did you realize that? Did you realize they had an 8-game winning streak? Because I feel like the whole fan base refuses to acknowledge that prior to their one loss that wasn't close this year, they had an 8-game winning streak. So
they lost by a total of 8 points all season.
Yeah, and they lost 3 games by a total of 8 points. So we have to acknowledge that.
Mike, can we not acknowledge that they went 3-5 last year in the middle of the season to lose the 1 and 2 seed?
Yeah. The Bills were 7-6.
They went 3-5.
Yeah. They were 7-6, 13 games into last season. But yet last season was probably their best chance of winning a Super Bowl because they got hot at the right time. So the important thing I think for us to maybe acknowledge going forward isn't that the Bills need to make a major change to their offense, their defense, their special teams. It's that they need to peak at the right time going forward. This is a team that I feel like peaks to start seasons, and then sometimes they go in a little peak in the second late tier of the season. And all of these 3 runs, actually going back to 2019, since 2019, they've gotten out to hot starts every year. And what happens about after week 4, week 5? Then they go through struggles for a little bit. And then they get back on track, but they never really regain the dominance. We need to find a way to where this team is at their hot spot at the end of December. Not September, not early October, but the end of December and January. They have not been able to do that outside of last year. And then obviously 13 seconds. But the last thing I really want to talk about this season, because we've been hard on them. They went 14-4 this year, and we know they need to be better in the playoffs. But those 3 losses by 8 points, you can point to a mistake that Josh Allen made in every one of those games. So you're telling me if you just clean up that one mistake each game, they would have had a chance to have a perfect record this year. Obviously, it wasn't going to happen. But say 2 of those games go differently, and they go 16-1 or 15-1 in the regular season. Are we talking about firing anybody at this point? Probably not, because it would sound ridiculous even after a tough playoff loss to fire anybody after a 16-1 regular season. And Greg has brought it up in our Cover One group chats. Imagine how differently we're talking about this season had Josh not fumbled the snap against Minnesota, and they moved forward and they finished that game. They finished that game against Minnesota in the DeMar Hamlin situation. Even if it does happen, I'm assuming it doesn't happen, the Bills could have gotten crushed by Cincinnati. They still would have had the 1 seed wrapped up. with the 1 seed wrapped up, they're playing the Jacksonville Jaguars in the second round. Let's acknowledge, even though the Bills played poor, they're probably getting past the Jacksonville Jaguars. So in that scenario, we're talking about the Bills hosting the AFC Championship against the Chiefs in Buffalo. Even if the Bills lost against the Chiefs, are we assuming the Bills would have gotten blown out? Probably not, because the Chiefs, we saw their injury situation on Sunday. They're horrible. So even if the Bills would have lost the game, probably a close game. That slip against Minnesota changed history. It changed the direction of the entire season. This team gets that 1 seed. We are talking completely differently about this squad. And I know what happened is what happened, but narratives are made because of recency bias. And Bruce exclusive on Twitter will always kind of point that out. And a lot of people give him crap for it because we're all emotional. But when you remove yourself from the emotions and you can look at it from a more analytical way, from a more, this is what things are, this is what they aren't, I think it's easier to accept they're not as far away as what many think. And when you go into next season, I think we're going to see the LA Chargers be much improved in the AFC West, which will give Kansas City more trouble going forward. The AFC North is going to have some talent with Deshaun Watson, with Lamar most likely coming back to Baltimore. It's not going to be a cakewalk for Cincinnati anymore. The AFC South is not anything special.
It wasn't with Tyler Hunt.
We keep talking about how it's going to be Kansas City and Cincinnati forever. The Bills still have one of the easier divisions out of that group. I know Miami is threatening. I know New England's not a gimme, and that the Jets have a great defense. But there's still a lot of room for the Bills to keep being a force going forward. I'm hearing a lot of people giving up on this team. And I guess my perspective is I still don't see how this team is any worse than 12-5 next year. I still see this team as a contender. I still see this team as a franchise that should be going into every season expecting to have a chance at winning a Super Bowl. And I don't think most of the nation has changed their view on that. You look at Vegas, they still have the Bills as one of the top 3 favorites for next year. So I know we got burned by Vegas this year, but sometimes it's good to take a step back and look at what other people are saying about your team. And most of the outsiders, most of my friends from across the country, they still think the Bills are pretty damn good. So when I hear that, I tell myself, make the tweaks you need, make the offseason adjustments that you can, and go into next year and prove everybody wrong, prove the doubters wrong. And maybe some of that pressure removed from them could actually be a good thing heading into the season.
One thing our Hansel Uberhansen from Cover One tweeted, the expectations from Brandon Beane, his expected rank and his draft class. The Bills finished number 3 in 2018. They were expected 21st based on their picks. Number 8 draft class in 2019. They were expected number 9. In 2020, 18th. They finished 2020, 22nd expectation in 2020. In 2021, 13th best draft class expectation was they finished 30th based on their picks that year. And last year, 25th was the expectation based on their draft capital and where they were picking and where they finished. And they did exceed that 21st. So he is hitting on his draft picks. So that does show that there could be the roster is pretty good, but there's definitely needs to be some development from the rookies that we didn't see. And a weird year where they decided not to play Khalil Shakir, which is an interesting decision. James Cook late in the year. They, obviously had their rotation with Kyrie Elam. Terrell Bernard didn't really play. I know many people are pretty upset about that pick. We are a little bit foiled here for a 3rd round pick as well. Obviously the Matt Ariza situation. Benford is in and out, with injuries. And Tenuta was cut. So ultimately, yes, there is some thing to be said for last year's draft. Wasn't the best, but there is still some talented players. I think Kyrie Elam's a day 1 starter. I think James Cook's your day 1 running back right now. Khalil Shakir, you're your day 1 slot. It could be a 2-year removed draft to be some
important
studs.
People want instant results. McDermott and Beane have shown you have to earn your opportunity on this roster. With the veterans that they have, they don't want to just give away playing time unless you show that you deserve it. And yes, fans are going to be aggravated by it, but that's also part of the culture that they built. You earn your time on the field. And
Khalil Shakir is going to have a whole offseason with Josh Allen, which he didn't have. He was playing with Case Keenum. He didn't know, yes, he was going to make the roster, but now he's going to get an entire offseason as a pretty prominent part of the Bills offense. Yeah. In those off seasons, those chilling, those playing video games, whatever they play, that's important to Josh.
You and I were both high on Khalil Shakir, and I think he showed flashes that he can be,
especially in the playoffs.
Player, and I expect him to be play a pivotal role on this team in the future, maybe as early as next year. I see some comments about the schedule and how it's a monster next year. Guys, you can't look at the schedule in February and be worried about it. Things never play out the way it looks, even if it is a monster. You got to remember, the Bills have
This
Josh
year was too. This year was too.
The schedule is always a monster when
they went 13-3. Number one strength of schedule.
The Bills have Josh Allen. Just keep telling, if you're concerned about the future of the Bills, if you're concerned about the rest of the AFC East and where the Bills currently stand, and you're starting to be scared about the future, just tell yourself repeatedly in your head, maybe 100 times, repeat it. The Bills have Josh Allen as their starting quarterback. If you say that enough times in your head in a row, you will eventually regain that calm emotional state to where you realize the Bills will still be good. They will be okay, and it's not time to panic. Because I know people are starting to mention the Miami Dolphins because they gave a close game to the Bills in the playoffs, and the Jets and New England. And I saw even a comment that the AFC East is more difficult than the West and the North. That's a little naive. I hate to say it, but the Jets don't have a quarterback. The Patriots don't have a quarterback. Miami has a good quarterback that, honestly, most of Bill's Mafia told me for the last year sucked. And then after a year of me saying that he didn't suck, now we're starting to appreciate him. But an often injured quarterback that is a concussion or two from missing serious time every time. So there's no point looking at the rest of the AFC, but there are more difficult divisions out there than what the Bills have faced. When you're talking about the Patriots with Mac Jones, the Jets with Wilson or whoever they end up getting, so what? They get Aaron Rodgers. Okay, nice. Maybe they can go 10-7 and squeak in the playoffs. I'm just not going to get concerned over that right now. Josh Allen is a stud. We all say this, Kev. It's a quarterback-driven league. The top quarterbacks are the players on the teams that win the most. The Bills have 37 wins in the regular season in the last 3 years. Josh Allen ain't going nowhere. So even when he was playing hero ball this year with no weapons, he was still able to have the number 2 metric offense. They were able to win 13 games. Where's that going to go? How's that going to get worse? So even if he takes a regression, what's a regression from this year? He turned the ball over 6 or 7 times in the red zone this year. If anything, I'm thinking he can actually improve his numbers because I don't know how Josh can really play much worse in certain critical situations than he did this year. Josh did not have an unbelievable season by any stretch of the imagination by his standards. Compared to most normal people, great year. But Josh had turnover issues all year. He was loose with the ball. He made a lot of poor turnovers in the red zone, and he struggled at times. If he can clean that up, this offense actually has room for improvement next year. And so I'm not going to look at any other team in the league outside of Kansas City, Cincinnati, the Eagles, and then possibly San Francisco, depending on what they do with their quarterback situation. I'm not going to look at any other team besides those 4 and say the Bills don't have a chance against them, because besides those 4 teams, I know the Bills will have either the quarterback advantage or the talent advantage. So on days they don't have the talent advantage, they'll get it done with Josh. So I just, Kev, maybe I'm more calm. Maybe I'm more relaxed than most people. I'm just not in a freak out mood about this team. I still believe the Bills are in a position to be a great team going forward. I feel like if podcasts existed, if this live streaming has existed in the early 90s, we would have destroyed the Bills Super Bowl teams before they got to 4 in a row. We would have been calling for half the team to be gone because they got destroyed by Washington in the Super Bowl. And then after the 3rd Super Bowl, my God, Jim Kelly might not have been the quarterback anymore. After Thurman Thomas lost his helmet, Thurman Thomas would have been probably cut on the scene. we got to be calm sometimes. And I don't want to feel like I'm lecturing people because I know I'm a dick. Like, I'll just admit it. Like, I'm a condescending prick at times. And I'm not trying to be that way. But I just think it's important for us to take a breath and realize we have that franchise guy. He's 26 years old. He's not going anywhere.
Right. Well, I think the funny part too is, yes, we all like to say the analytics don't matter. The top 6 teams were the top 6 remaining teams Sunday before kickoff of the Bills game last week. So the top 6 DVOA teams were the top 6 teams remaining. The 2 and the 4 ended up going on to the Super Bowl. So DVOA does matter. It's just unfortunately, at best, 20% odds to make the Super Bowl at any given time, and that's on the good end. The strength of schedule isn't really a thing. The home schedule is very easy. They need to get it done there and still continue to win on the road and get it done. So to me, they are always going to be in the lead in games. And I believe truly that the Bills are going to go out and address all the offensive holes. Dorsey's going to say, hey, I need a right tackle. I need a left guard. I need a running back, and I need a receiver. I think Bean goes and gets it done. And ultimately basically tell Sean, like, hey, you're a defensive coach. You got to keep your entire staff this year. We need your best work this year on defense because of where you're at with the defensive roster. So I think there's a chance to see the best version of what the Bills are able to do with Micah Hyde, Von Miller, both supposed to be ready by training camp, coming back. It's going to be a little bit different. Vaughn's is already in a really good spot, and getting them back definitely for September would be a big boost to this defense alone. And then maybe the biggest move there is whatever they can get done with Tremaine Edmonds, if they can make that work and still do offense.
Do you think they get him done?
I think it puts a strain on Kevin's offensive plan. I think it does. I think $20 million is challenge with the first year being less, obviously, of getting the offensive players we're talking about. That's still putting assets, money, time, value, interest into defense still.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a freak out either way, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, we're in a lose-lose. We're in a lose-lose.
If the Bills re-sign Tremaine, people are going to just be flabbergasted by how much money he's getting, because he's going to get like a 6-year, $90 million deal, a 5-year, $80 million deal, something outrageous. And fans are going to be like, what? And if they don't re-sign him, people are going to be freaking out about letting the linebacker that they traded up in the first round to get walk after 5 seasons at the age of 25 after putting all that time with him. So yeah, it's gonna be.
But they need that. They need that 18, whatever it's going to be on the cap, call it 14 after they do some finagling on the cap. They need that. So that's the challenge. As much as Tremaine Edmonds is an easy, like, the must resign. Don't resign anyone else if you don't have to. They need that money to better the positions that we just spent the entire show and offseason continuing to talk about. Otherwise, there is so much pressure on pick 27 to get offense, and you can't be sitting there 27 picks in hoping for a number 2 receiver. It just doesn't. I don't know how this is all going to play out. I still think they need to do anything they can to make this running game better and give the team a true dual threat ability. Like we saw with Pacheco at times down the stretch. Could it be a Bijan Robinson? Is it James Cook? We'll have to see. Is it a veteran running back? They're all on the market. Every single one of them. Miles Sanders, David Montgomery. They're all on the market as we, obviously the top 10 guys, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs. Could they trade for somebody that might be Derrick Henry's on a 1-year deal? Whatever it might be, there are names to help this roster out offensively. And at 27, you're very vulnerable to be sitting there hoping that Bijan Robinson falls, Jordan Addison falls, Osiris Torrence falls. You're in a vulnerable spot. You don't know what you can do at that position. You had just made it to the division round again. You need to increase this roster, and the flexibility might come from trading at Oliver and from either getting Tremaine on a deal that's very cheap this year and then expensive later on, or having to let him walk. The Bills have some tough decisions, and they need to focus on offense. And that is the future going forward for the Buffalo Bills. Increase that offense, give them the weapons that the Bengals, the Niners, I guess the Chiefs ended up losing them all in the game anyways. And the Eagles have.
Yeah. No, I agree, Kev. And one of the last things I want to throw out at you, there was a good stretch. I forget the time frame. I think it was 17 years maybe from Brady's second Super Bowl up until 2019, where the only quarterbacks outside Joe Flacco in his outlier year that went to a Super Bowl in the AFC were Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Ben Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger went to 3. He won the 2. Manning went to 4. He won 2. And then Brady obviously won 6 in New England. I think the reason I have this patient approach long-term with the Bills is that, unfortunately, we're in the same league as the Kansas City Chiefs, and now I believe, obviously, the Cincinnati Bengals. And Burrow and Mahomes just so happen to be around the same age as Josh Allen. History is repeating itself, in my opinion, with these 3 guys. I don't think it's going to be easy for the Bills at all in the next 10 years to get to a Super Bowl. And my thought process with this was the years when Ben Roethlisberger made it in. Was he better than Tom Brady? Was he better than Peyton Manning? No, his team just, that was their year. Same with the Broncos when they won it, and the Colts when they won it. It took them a great performance at home against the Patriots to finally get to the Super Bowl and then beat the Bears. My approach is we talk about how the Bills should attack the offseason. We talk, well, get this running back, get this wide receiver, fire this coach, fire that coach, change your scheme, change what you're doing with the linebackers, or your defensive line needs to get more pressure. There's really one simple solution, like how do the Bills break through? How do they finally get to the Super Bowl? And how do they finally win one? And that's when we get to mid-January going forward, we just need Josh Allen to play like the best quarterback in the NFL. And that's honestly the only thing that makes a difference. The Bills could make every right move in free agency, in the draft, development-wise. They could be 17-0. But if they play Cincinnati in the second round, or they play the Chiefs in the second round, and Josh Allen has a garbage game and Pat Mahomes goes off, they're going to lose. And none of it will matter about what the Bills did defensively in the offseason, or what blitz Leslie Frazier called on third down, or what stupid run play Dorsey ran on 3rd and 3, or anything like that. It's all going to come down to, did Josh Allen play like an MVP quarterback in the most important moment? That's why last year haunts me, because he had the game against the Patriots. He had the game against the Chiefs. And I will agree, in that moment, 13 seconds, the coaching let down the team. Execution did too, but the coaching let down the team. But going forward, I'm not even worried. Like, what are they going to do? It comes down to Josh. Like, I know that's an oversimplification, but everybody's going to freak out about this move, that move, whatever move. You know the deeper numbers, Kev. How much does a random defensive player add to WAR when wins above a replacement? Like 0.3 of a game. If you go through a defensive lineup and you go through all the starters, each individual player has a minimal impact on a team's overall win-loss record throughout a season. Correct? Based on projections?
Especially in football. That's why war is more useful in, like, say, baseball, you know? So
when you look at it, what's the one person that has a huge impact on that's not proportional to the rest of the roster? It's your quarterback. We can debate everything. We can argue. We can call each other names. In the end, if the Bills are going to win a Super Bowl in the next decade, it is up to Josh Allen playing like the best quarterback in football. If he does it, this team will have a chance to win. If Josh doesn't do it, 10 years from now, we will be looking back. We will not be blaming the defensive coordinator. We will not be blaming the special teams coordinator or the offensive coordinator. We will be blaming Josh Allen. So I know, like I said, oversimplification, but the reason I'm calm is because I know Josh is a top 3 quarterback, and I trust that in this next decade, he will have at least one postseason where it all comes together and he gets that Lombardi. But if he doesn't, that's going to be the situation. And they're going to go through different coaching staffs on the offense and the defense throughout the years. He eventually just has to get it done.
Yeah.
Simple as
And
that.
to your point, even the best so in baseball, over 162 games, Aaron Judge had one of the best seasons in baseball history. 10 games he affected. That's good for one NFL game roughly. And that's one of the best seasons by a baseball player ever, extrapolated over 162 games. So yes, there's really no player that's going to set you over. And like you mentioned, it's a culmination of good draft picks, Super Josh, and a better scheme. It's threefold, right? It's that the level you're talking about with Josh that you just told us about. It's hitting on draft picks because he needs some help. And then it's the scheme of it. So we need the help to help him get to that level you're talking about. And then it's the scheme of it. They do need some light layups. They do need to scheme Josh some easy plays in these games, as well as the players, the second piece, and then Super Josh. That is the puzzle that needs to be done. And it doesn't need to come from, trading for Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams and Bijan Robinson. I mean, it comes with, let's get some good offensive linemen in here rounds 2 to 4. Let's maybe get a playmaker, whether it's Bijan Robinson or Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, whomever that they deem to be that next level piece for the offense, and then fill in with some really good reserve DBs and maybe find a pass rusher. But that's what they need to do. It's not, it's they need the pieces, and then the coaching needs to scheme these pieces now that Super Josh, now we got the pieces. Dorsey needs to be better. He needs to be better than he was. He struggled with creativity. Super Josh, took over, and he has the interceptions, and he had the problems this year. He had the elbow. Look at what Purdy just went through. He's out 6 months.
That elbow, I think, had a bigger.
Josh is playing through the same thing, and his size and stature is what probably stopped his from being worse. But he's playing through essentially a 6-month injury. So we need to see that rehab. We need to get him help. We need to use Khalil Shakir. We need that second receiver, and we need a running game and filling in with a couple of offensive linemen. You add Bijan Robinson. You add in a couple of offensive line pieces, Jarrett Patterson at offensive line, and the next thing you know, you're in good shape, and you are in a position to use to your point, Super Josh division round next year. Hopefully they're the 1 seed and don't have to make KC and Cincy play this time in the division round, and you get the whatever team that's, whether it's Jacksonville or LA or whatever team that's still there that's not as good as the other 3. After a bye on top of it that you can game plan against with your healthy roster. So Mike, that's the plan. Load up offense so Josh can go super in the division round, and then let's scheme these talented players for your super player. So that's the way it works. We had the super player. At times we had some weapons and a few things. The three pieces to the puzzle, to the mixture, just wasn't great.
And you're right.
Period.
Scheme is huge. And I think Amicus is a little mad at me right now based on all caps. You and I both know it's not all Allen. But we're saying in the playoffs, that's when your quarterback needs to be that guy. Mahomes gets it done in the playoffs. For whatever reason, he fell short in the Super Bowl. But for the most part, Mahomes gets it done in the playoffs. Burrow doesn't dominate the playoffs, but he finds a way to win in the playoffs. Josh has been impressive with the stats overall. But just so people understand my point a little bit more, it's not that the Bills obviously have to surround Allen with a good team. But in the end, it's the quarterback that you win and lose with. So I gave the examples of obviously Peyton, Tom Brady, and Ben Roethlisberger. But you can go back in time and continue that. Jim Kelly went to 4 Super Bowls in a row with the Bills in the early 90s. John Elway went to, I believe, he went to a bunch of Super Bowls. He won 2 in a row in the late 90s. I think he lost 4 before that. And then you can even add some other quarterbacks. Traditionally, each decade, you have 1 or 2 quarterbacks that kind of dominate. So the question is, does Josh Allen have it in him to take the Bills to that level? I'm not saying he can't do it. You're right. It is scheme. And I saw a comment that mentioned, do Miami fans blame Dan Marino for not winning a Super Bowl? Well, I'll throw this at you, Kev. They had Dan Marino and Don Shula, who a lot of people thought was maybe the greatest coach in NFL history before Bill Belichick. And they only went to 1 Super Bowl with Dan Marino, who's considered one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. That is kind of considered a failure in Miami. Like, no one's going to doubt Marino's greatness. But they didn't win 1. So I would look back and be like, yeah, that is a disappointment. You had Don Shula. How did you not win 1? So because Elway and Kelly got in his way plenty of times. And even the Bengals in the 80s got in his way. If we want to change the history of this Bills franchise and win a title, we're going to need Allen to be the guy that rewrites the history book. We're not going to be talking about a random sack or a random tackle for loss. It's going to be Allen won the game. I don't care if the game is 13-10. Peyton Manning's second Super Bowl in Denver, his second appearance in the Super Bowl in Denver, he couldn't even throw a spiral more than 15 yards down the field. He gets credit for that Super Bowl. He found a way to will them to that game. And when you look at a lot of these franchises, once they lose their stud quarterback, what are they afterwards? What have the Patriots been since Tom Brady left? They're a shell of themselves. What have the Steelers been in the late years of Ben Roethlisberger and now Kenny Pickett? Definition of mediocrity. Since Peyton Manning left the Broncos, horrible. So the key is your quarterbacks are the guys that are going to win and lose you these games. And when you lose the quarterback, your team falls apart. Why does the team fall apart? Because the quarterback carries the team.
Yeah.
Bills need Josh Allen to carry this team.
Well, there you have it. There you have it. What do the Bills do? Go from here? Have Josh Allen, give him weapons. We're going to be on this train all offseason. You'll see that all February and March and into the draft season. Get Josh Allen weapons. We said it last year. We're going to double down on it this year. That's going to be the themes of our shows going forward. How are we going to get Josh Allen weapons? How are we going to put that 3-piece of the 3-piece pie that we've been talking about on this show? And we're going to expand on that this entire offseason. So we'll be bringing you that. The first piece of this all is going to be the Senior Bowl. The team's there. We have a new video dropping in 30 minutes. Make sure you see the day 1 recap right here on the Cover One podcast network. That's going to be fun to see what the guys were able to drum up and see all of the great content that they've been producing right there. So make sure you tune into that just in 30 minutes, live on the ground in Mobile, Alabama. As always, we're going to be bringing you get Josh Allen weapons for the majority of the year. And yes, I do have a Josh Allen Funko. Both of them, a Stephon Diggs one and a couple of other fun stuff. But anyways, we will be back at you at our normal time next Tuesday at 7 p.m. to continue on the future outlook of the Buffalo Bills. And as we get into the offseason, lots to discuss. And we'll see if there's any big news or nuggets this time next week. But stay tuned in 30 minutes for the on-the-ground Senior Bowl footage that the team was able to do. Day 1 Senior Bowl recap is going to be coming at you. So everybody make sure to tune in to that. From Kevin and Mike, this is the Going Deep podcast. We'll catch you next week, 7 o'clock on Tuesdays. We'll catch you guys then.
Josh Allen looking deep, going deep.
To me, talking about the Bills, what else would you rather be doing?
We're hoping to add a new dimension to the Cover One network.
Slings it deep downfield, and it's caught inside the 20.
Right now, I just want to talk about this championship level. I've never had a championship caliber team to talk about.
I want to focus more on the storylines each week. What are the big stories going on with the Bills? What are thoughts, commentary? How do these things impact Buffalo?
Deep drop. Deep throw, and it is hauled in for the touchdown.
Allen deep to the end zone and caught for a touchdown.
Play action. Allen